And all this stuff, it does completely shipwreck any of that old conviction about the earth being 6,000 years old and the Bible being literally true in the plain sense. At the time, I remember seeing like a demon or something in a bonfire. And the plan was always to go back to church. It messed me up, I think, emotionally, not in the super rebellious way. I didn't turn to drugs or booze or end up on the streets or anything like that. I was just an angry kid. She just came up to me and said, "You know what? I don't think I believe this stuff anymore." Oh, thank God. Hey, guess what? Me neither.
Sign up today for The Real Ancient Israelite Religions with Dr. Kipp Davis. Dr. Kipp Davis, I'm excited about this show we're going to be recording today. I have never seen you actually give a formal
testimony
of your story. I'm looking forward to hearing where you come from, what you believed, where you were at, your journey into what you learned, what you have become, and how that has impacted you with your faith and where you are today.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and I'm curious to know.
Okay. So, I'm a Canadian. I grew up an evangelical. I would say my family upbringing was like very seriously evangelical. We went to church twice every Sunday, and we went every Wednesday evening, like all good evangelicals. Had a personal conversion experience at the ripe old age of 5. I accepted Jesus into my heart. I had a really, really very good, very happy childhood. It was fun being a kid. I had lots of friends at church. So church was never of course, I hated sitting in like the services, right? But I never had, I never really had bad feelings or bad thoughts about it. Didn't bore me, I think. I will say, however, Sunday evenings made me a little bit resentful because in the 80s, every Sunday evening at 6 was the Magical World of Disney on TV, and we got to see the first 5 minutes of every episode, and then we had to go, and we never got to see it. And of course, it's before VCRs and so that sucked. That sucked. So I was baptized, I think as soon as I was able, I was baptized. And there was an age limit in my church. I think if I remember correctly, you had to be 9 or 10 years old before you got baptized. I famously, though, at my church when I was 6 or 7 years old, we had a Sunday service. Then we had a potluck, and all the kids are like running around like maniacs around the church, and it was a big church too, right? Running around like maniacs in the church, and they had a baptism planned following the potluck. So there's like a big baptismal font, like a big pool, right at the front of the church. And I, being the precocious young lad that I was 6. I was there at the baptismal tank, and there was like a centimeter of water, like a half an inch of water, like on that first step into the tank. And I was being a bit of a smartass and thinking, oh yeah, I'm just gonna step down, you know, onto this first step. I don't know what I was doing, but I slipped and I fell like right into the baptismal font with all my clothes on. And my family and everybody used to joke that I got baptized twice. But but it was, yeah, I was a happy child. It was a good childhood. Things kind of fell apart for me in high school. My parents got separated and divorced when I was 16 years old, which is something that did not happen in my church, in my Christian world. It messed me up, I think, emotionally, but not in the super rebellious way. I didn't, turn to drugs or booze or, end up on the streets or anything like that. I was just an angry kid. I lived with my dad, and he bought me, or he bought this book, and he read this book, and then he gave it to me to read. Maybe you've heard of this book. It's called "He Came to Set the Captives Free" by Rebecca Brown. You heard of that one?
Sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
So you've heard of Jack T. Chick publications, Chick tracts?
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, they are classified as hate speech by the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States. Like he is out there. But he was the publisher of this book, and this book purports to have been written by a medical doctor, and actually says on the cover Rebecca Brown, MD. So, but this isn't a book about medicine, and it's not a book about being a doctor. It's about, having encounters with demons and with Satan, and rescuing people out of like a satanic human sacrificing cabal living in somewhere in Ohio. It was crazy stuff, but I bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. This was in the the late 80s, early 90s, right at the height of the satanic panic, and I was all in on this. And it was kind of at that time I just, I started having, like visionary experiences. I started having encounters, which seems like spiritual encounters, but like real life kind of spiritual encounters that I interpreted as seeing like angels, in the street on my way home from work or on my way to work. Just really weird. There was a period where I'm pretty sure at the time I remember seeing like a demon or something in a bonfire, like, so this, I mean, I was messed up emotionally. I was messed up, but I think what this did is it sort of pushed me into the direction of focus on my faith, on my beliefs. I was always a bit of a Bible nerd. Growing up, I had a picture Bible. It was like my favorite. My parents also bought this. They got this, like, it's a set of 80 cassette tapes called The Bible in Drama. And it literally is like a radio drama, a radio dramatization of the entire Bible. It was pretty awesome. But I listened to these things over and over and over again. So I had a deep love from the beginning of the Bible. And like with all this stuff that was happening to me emotionally, spiritually, I think it really pushed me to just dig deep and to get serious about it. And when I graduated from high school, I went to like a discipleship school overseas. I spent a year in New Zealand there, and it was while I was there that I felt really convicted, commissioned, to go into some sort of professional ministry, to become a pastor, a minister of the gospel. I got married, and then I started Bible school. The first Bible school I attended was far too warm and fuzzy for my tastes. I got in with a crowd of these James White kind of Calvinist Reformed theologian types, and of course, I was already kind of an angry person, and this just made me more angry, right? So, um, but as I said, the college that I was attending was way too warm and fuzzy for me, so I transferred out, and my wife and I packed up our stuff. I was in Calgary, Alberta, my hometown at the time. Go Flames! Um, and we moved across the mountains just outside of Vancouver to attend what at the time was called Northwest Baptist Theological College and Seminary. Much more closely aligned to my angry James Whitey Reformed theological beliefs. But the college at the time was located on the campus of Trinity Western University, which is an evangelical Christian university, but it is a proper university. It's an actual school, and there are very good people doing good serious academic work there. And it was while I was at Trinity that I was introduced to real academic biblical studies. One of the things that my college didn't offer was language classes. So I was very excited right away going to Northwest Baptist to take language classes. And the way it worked at Northwest, being on the same campus as Trinity, is a lot of the courses that they offered were actually cross-listed. And so you'd actually go and attend a university course. So, and this is what my language courses were offered through Trinity Western University. So my very first teacher, my very first Greek teacher was Marty G. Abeg, who the great Marty G. Abeg, Dead Sea Scroll scholar. He was also brand new at Trinity when I started. And he was brought on campus by Craig A. Evans, both him and Peter W. Flint, that same year, to start the Dead Sea Scrolls Institute and to start a new graduate program at Trinity with a special focus on Dead Sea Scrolls. So I'll be honest with you. I knew nothing, almost nothing about the Dead Sea Scrolls before I got to Trinity. And then I really, really liked Marty right away, and it started to make me interested. And I eventually transferred out of the college into the university, abandoned the thought that I would ever become a pastor, in large part because I wasn't particularly fond of people. It's a bad mix if you don't like people and you're a pastor. So I shifted, and I was good at the languages. I took Greek and I took Hebrew before I even got to my fourth year of undergraduate. I already had 2 years of Hebrew, 2 years of Greek, and a year of Syriac, which was a lot for an undergraduate. So I really liked it, and I was good at it. So I decided, you know what, maybe I can become a Bible professor. And that's sort of where it started. Very early on, while I had enrolled in this in this especially James Whitey Reformed Theological College, very, very strictly conservative, pretty quickly, I think within a year or two after I started, I was no longer a conservative Christian. I had to I after transferring into the university, I had to take courses in biology, and I had to take courses in philosophy and in psychology, and all this stuff, it just completely shipwrecked any of that old conviction about the earth being 6,000 years old, and the Bible being literally true in the plain sense. And I pretty quickly became a fairly liberal, progressive Christian. Certainly before I graduated, graduated from university. But I went straight into grad school, and I did, and that's really where I started to focus in earnest on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I did a thesis focused on the on a particular manuscript from the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q382, the Papyrus Paraphrase of Kings, which is an ugly son of a bitch. It is 152 papyrus fragments that look terrible. But this is what I did. I went to grad school. When I finished grad school, I pushed on and I entered a PhD program at the University of Manchester. Still, still very much very committed to Jesus, very committed to the faith, but more in like a Randall Rouser kind of a way, and very happy too with this whole arrangement. Um, my wife and I, who my wife and I at the time, right around when I started my PhD, we had been married already for, I think, over 10 years. We didn't have kids yet. There was some question about whether or not we would even be able to have kids. So we had sort of decided early on that we would, we would always adopt at least one kid. Didn't have any of our own at that point, but decided, we need to start a family, and it was difficult for us. We made the decision right around the time I started my PhD that we would adopt. And so we adopted, and literally right I got accepted into the PhD program at the University of Manchester, and right around that time we had adopted my oldest son, Jaden. He was 4 years old, going on 5 at the time. He is now 23, going on 24. But he was a kid who grew up in the foster system. He had 8 placements. He had already had a disrupted adoption. He had serious attachment issues. And the adoption workers really liked Lisa and me from the outset, just because I think we're pretty chill. We're pretty easygoing people, and as people who were like this, but also didn't have any of our own kids in the first place, like hadn't born children, and maybe didn't have any expectation of having biological children in the future. I think we were able to parent this little boy with these attachment difficulties. But wow, did that ever do a number on many of my thoughts and beliefs about who God is. Being faced with and recognizing that there's biochemical changes that can affect a person's entire life, just on the basis of their genetic material, and also on the basis socially speaking, of like their inability to properly attach to a mother. It really, I don't want to get into a lot of the specifics, but it really had me it really challenged my thinking about, you know, about things like the nature, human nature, sin, um, these sorts of concepts that we grow up with as, as part of our being as humans, but also something that was correctable. We all have this deep understanding of right and wrong and stuff. Well, my son didn't have it, right? And it was difficult to explain that, or to confront that from this perspective. So that did a number on us. I went through the PhD program. We adopted 2 more kids while I was in the PhD program, and also out of the foster system, and also with their own issues. Like one of my sons has crippling anxiety, to the extent that so he was able to go to Sunday school, but would not set foot inside the auditorium, the sanctuary of the church, because he was so terrified. Terrified of hell, terrified of dying, terrified of heaven, which, for me in my upbringing was just kind of like, I don't get that. I don't understand. But seeing it, I'm just like, man, like it forced me to recalculate so much of my faith, that by the time I finished my PhD, I was a Christian out of necessity. I would tell people, I'm like, my focus is the historical, critical study of the Bible, and through the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I literally have to take off my scholar's hat at the end of the day and go and put on my church hat, just to survive in church. Because so much of this stuff started to, it didn't make rational sense anymore. So in order to continue to believe, and I deeply, deeply wanted to continue to believe, I had a wonderful Christian life. I cherished it. I loved it. It was very fulfilling, very rewarding. So I fought like a dog to make sure that I would stay in the faith. But over time, I just, when I finally came out to my mom that I no longer believed that I was, an atheist. And she, when she pressed me for how or why this happened, the only thing I could tell her was that I just stopped believing. I just could no longer believe the things that seemed incredulous to me. And I could not force myself to believe things that seemed incredulous to me. I'm like, you either believe this or you don't believe it. You can't pretend. I'm like, I feel like I had been pretending for a long time, and I just couldn't pretend anymore. So I had a position in Norway shortly after I finished my PhD, working on scroll fragments from a private collection there, the Skøyen collection. I was also involved in the publication project for the re-edition of the Cave 1 manuscripts, which was supposed to come out in Dead Sea Scrolls editions from Brill. So we went over there, packed up the whole family, and moved the whole family to Norway in 2012 to take this position. And while we were there, the language barrier more than anything early on caused us to stop going to church. And after a while, my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, you know what? I much prefer hanging out at home with you and with the kids than I do in a church. So it was one of these gradual things that just kept chipping away. And I was for a long I think I had already come around to the point where I had decided I don't believe any of this anymore. But I was terrified of telling my wife about this because I love her and I wanted to be married, to stay married to her. And I was terrified of what this might do to our marriage. So I avoided it at all costs. I avoided it. And it came as an enormous relief to me when one day she just came up to me and said, you know what? I don't think I believe this stuff anymore. Oh, thank God. Hey, guess what? Me neither. Oh, shoo. We can go on and live our lives now. I know, right? So, yeah. I mean, I think that's my story. Out of faith.
Let me add some icing on the cake because this has been an amazing story, Dr. Kipp. I really, really love what you did here. Your story to your deconversion and the fact that now you can live happily ever after without having to worry about the tension in your relationship because one is a believer, unequally yoked, that kind of thing. Then there's also the children and the upbringing there. I don't need to get any further into the deepness of your own family situation and where your family is. But I am curious to know, since you've come back from Norway, you're in Canada, and then your appearances on YouTube and stuff. Can you fill us in on this and what you see your role as? What do you think when you wake up in the morning or you project a mirror of yourself in the world? How are you trying to present yourself? What is your mission? What is your goal in the internet world?
Wow, what a great question. First of all, I want to say, like, coming back from Norway, I think the plan was, even though we didn't believe anymore, my wife and I, the plan was always to go back to church, mostly for the kids, just because we saw it as sort of a stable place for them, and circumstances being what they were. My contract was 3 years, but my wife ended up getting a job back home after 2 years, and she left with the kids to go and work this job, and I ended up alone there for like a full year. It was, I mean, in some respects, certainly at first, it was so lonely and it was so hard right away that all I had was work, and I literally, like, I got up at like 6 in the morning and I started working, and I worked until I went to bed at 10 or 11 at night every single goddamn day. So it was the most productive year of my life, but wow, it was tough. When my wife went back with the kids, they tried going back to church, but she was working really hard too, right? Because she's effectively working as a single mom. We were still together, and this wasn't like, there was never any, I was going home to be with my family, right? As soon as I was done. But, she was effectively functioning as a single mom. So just way too tired to, to do much more than just, go to work, make sure the kids are healthy and fed and, safe. And that's what she had time for. And they stopped. They never got back to church. And I always kind of thought, oh, well, when I come back and I'm able to be, a contributing member to my family again, then, we'll be able to do this. And it just never happened. It was one of those things where, it just, it just didn't happen. So yeah. Like my life changed so much, I think, from that point prior to going to Norway and then coming back. Like it was so different all of a sudden. And yeah, what does it look like now? Who am I now? What do I see as my goal, I guess, my contribution? I started the channel. So when I came back from Norway, I worked I worked a few contracts at my alma mater, Trinity Western University, an evangelical Christian school. Still, like I'm still not publicly an atheist, which is the only way that I could continue to work at Trinity. I worked for a few years at Trinity as an atheist, while still holding my nose and signing off on that community covenant every year. But what could I needed the work, and it was, it was sort of the only viable place for me to go when I came back. And I felt bad about being dishonest about this, but by the same token, I've been a Christian for so long, I could play the role. So I would go to my classes. One thing we never did in my classes was pray, I'll tell you that much. But it wasn't, some professors did, some didn't. It wasn't something that they cared too much about, that, but that's something we never did in my classes. So thank goodness for that. But if they had required it, I could have done it. I put on a face while I was there teaching students, of fostering their faith in Jesus. How weird is that? Here I am, an atheist professor who is doing his damnedest to make sure that these kids are still the best Christians they can be. And, having, and a big part of the job, when you're teaching at an evangelical or a Christian school in a Bible department, is soothing all that angst that develops from the cognitive dissonance that you're developing by challenging them with historical, critical, biblical scholarship, right? So all this was going on. I started the YouTube channel in 2017, I think 2017 or 2018, something like that. And the reason I started, I had already been watching YouTube for a long time. I was a big fan of Logic, still am. I watched a lot of Aaron Ra. I watched Atheist Experience and Matt Dillahunty, and Josh Bowen popped up on my radar, and I'll be honest, my first impression when I watched Josh was, I could do that, right? I'm like, why am I not doing that? But I was not overly confident in my own skills working with the videos, right? But I started the channel because I was asked in whatever year that was, 2017, 2018, to do what's called an independent study at Trinity Western. If not every course is offered every year, a student has to take certain courses in order to graduate. And if a student comes up on the end of their at the end of their term, I guess they're close to graduation, and they're missing a course but it's not offered, then they can ask a professor to do a directed study, which is basically like a one-on-one course. They pay like shit. It's terrible. You barely get enough money to, I mean, it's really, really awful. But anyways, that's beside the point. I was asked and I agreed to do a directed study for a course that I taught quite a bit at Trinity, and it was one that that the department deemed me good enough to ask me to teach it a few times, and that's my course on what was called Israelite religion and Old Testament theology. And this is the course that I've essentially developed for MVP courses. It's, you can imagine, it's quite a bit different now than I ever taught it at Trinity Western, but and it's like a million times better. But I was asked to teach this course, this independent study, and I thought, the best way to do this is to sit down, make these video lectures, upload them to YouTube. Just give her the link, and she can go and watch the lectures on her own. She can read the textbook. We'll meet once a week, and we'll talk about we'll talk about what's in the lectures and in the textbook, and she'll write assignments and tests, and she'll be done. So that's where the channel started. I started uploading this stuff, and shortly after that, I made my very first video response to Michael Jones on a presentation he did on Genesis chapter 1 to 11. And I think at that point, and that's kind of my channel, right? I see my channel as a teaching tool and also a counter apologetics tool. Let's back up a little bit and talk about apologetics, because this is an important part also of my story. While I was a PhD student, I got a job at Trinity Western, working for a theologian, an apologist, who ran the department was called interdisciplinary studies. And he taught it as a Christian worldview. He taught it as Christian worldview courses. Every student at Trinity had to take one course, and they had to take it in their freshman year, and it was this introduction to Christian worldview. So it was a huge class. There was like 450 students. So he needed help with it, and that's what my job was. I was like liaising. He did all the lectures. I was liaising with students. I was doing, marking all the assignments. I was helping him out basically with whatever he needed. And then he taught this other course for all the seniors. Everybody was graduating had to take developing a Christian worldview. And, that class it wasn't 450 students, but it was usually up to like 100 every year. And this is what I did. And it was so frustrating for me because of these courses being offered in a serious university promoting Christian apologetics. I mean, that's all it was. It was how to manage your faith in a critical world. How to respond to skeptics, how to make sense and harmonize all the problems in the Bible, how to properly view science in light of religion and Christianity. It was awful. But I think this really is where I started to pay attention to apologetics and to apologists. And I think it was in that moment that I realized, oh my God, this is a serious problem. Apologetics, in my mind, is one of the worst things about Christianity, because the entire enterprise, I won't even call it a discipline, because it is not a scholarly discipline. The entire enterprise is founded on on essentially um, placating the hurt feelings of insecure Christians. It is entirely in-house. It doesn't the goal of apologetics, I am convinced, is modern apologetics is not about saving souls. It's about making Christians feel better about being Christians. And of course, the only way, as a biblical scholar, with so much of the problems within Christianity, especially the more fundamentalist or evangelical brands of Christianity, are centered on the Bible. The Bible is a problematic book because of the history, because of the very natural origins of the text and all the problems within the text. It's incredibly difficult for them to deal with, which is why apologetics is there. So it's all about helping Christians to get over their anxiety about the Bible. And the only way to do that is to do so through fabrications and weak arguments and, exegetical and historical fallacies. So that pretty quickly became kind of my goal with at least my YouTube channel. I love the Bible. I am a Bible teacher, and I see my role as a Bible teacher and a content creator as helping people understand what the Bible is and why it's so great. Because it's not a great religious text, but it's a great piece of ancient literature. It's not a great book around which to construct your life and your worldview, but wow, is it interesting! Wow, is it exciting when you really get right down into the text and you understand it within its original context, when you understand it as from the perspective of the early readers and interpreters of the Bible. Wow, it to me, that's where it comes alive, and that's where it's exciting. And I think that's what people need to hear, because in my opinion, I mean, Josh was out there, and yeah, he was doing a good job of what he was doing, but it felt to me like there is a concerted need for quality Bible scholarship that was publicly accessible on YouTube, and in large part because so much of the stuff that was publicly accessible was coming from this apologetic perspective, where we're constantly forgiving the text and attempting to maintain this this horribly flawed hermeneutical model, which maintains this weird integrity of the text that we need as evangelical Christians. So, moving forward, that's what I'm all about. I'm all about teaching the Bible. I'm all about countering apologetic nonsense when it comes to the Bible, and I'm still convinced too, even those apologists who want to fixate on philosophical arguments, or who, I don't know, want to fixate on scientific arguments for God. You can't ignore the Bible. No Christian can ignore the Bible. And because the Bible is so problematic, at one point or another, they're going to have to deal with someone like me.